Welcome into Basketball by Association. That's the name of this here show. My name is Arky. That is Joel. Joel, hello, sir.
You pointed in the wrong direction from...
Did I?
Yeah.
Sorry, my bad.
There you go.
I'm getting used to the new camera angle.
I was going to say, this is
That's Joel.
a brave new world. It's like a whole new Arky from this angle.
Well, I finally figured this camera
for better or worse. I didn't say for better or worse.
Oh, okay, because I heard worse. That's what I heard.
Let's talk very briefly about the name of this episode. And of course, the long-running bit or gag that we've had is to name each numbered episode, not the BbA bites, because that's a different animal, but to name it after a player who wore that number. And in the cases where we don't have a number, we've picked somebody from said year. We are at number 61. Arky, would you like to take an educated guess how many players have worn the number 61 in the history of the NBA?
I feel like, so I know you, Joel. I don't think you would give me a 0.
But
I feel like it's fairly low. So I'm gonna say like 9.
Oh, way too high. You get one more chance at this.
6.
No, only 2 players have ever worn the number 61, and here's where it really gets fun. The only 2 players to ever have worn number 61 both played for the same team in back-to-back years. That would be the Cincinnati Royals.
Okay.
So we're going back to the early 60s here, and you had 2 different players who wore 61. One was Dave Piontek, never heard of him. He was in 1963. And the guy before him, the year prior, who wore number 61, Bevo Nordman. So let's look at the career of Bevo Nordman real quick, besides it being a totally fun 1960s NBA player name. Like, I can't think of a better 1960s player name than Bevo Nordman. This is a guy who played in the league from the ages 22 to 25, and yet somehow he played for like 5 different teams. He was in Cincinnati for the 1 year. The following year, as a 23-year-old, he played in both St. Louis, that'd be for the Hawks, and for your New York Knicks. He appeared in 26 games for the Knicks. The following year, he played with the Knicks and went back to the Hawks somehow. That was for 7 games and 12 games, respectively. In his age 25 season, he appeared in 3 games for the Boston Celtics. These would be the world champion Boston Celtics, and then was out of the league. So just kind of a guy that bounced around. Bevo Nordman, 4 points, 4 rebounds per game. And over the course of those, I don't even know how many seasons, appeared in 133 games. So,
you're also talking about the time when, like, if you weren't playing in the league, like, you were a plumber.
Correct.
Right? Like,
so as a guy who presumably sat pretty far down the bench and didn't play that much, this guy was probably holding down a couple of different jobs during the year.
He's probably like, the NBA at that point was like, hey, this mechanic's pretty good, right? Like, he can hoop a little. Like,
dude was 6'10", 225, so he was a big dude for 1963.
Right. So it was, hey, this guy's tall.
Right.
Like, just hand him a ball. Like, he's just gonna just hand it up and put it in the old peach basket.
His name's Bevo. He sounds like he should be on a roster in today's league. Let's do it.
It would work. You can't tell me it wouldn't.
Right. All right, moving along. The Bevo Nordman episode is now in full swing.
It's the NBA postseason special, Mr. Joel Cordes, episode 61, as we discuss the NBA playoffs. And now we know what the brackets look like completely on both sides. And first of all, how about them Knicks, baby?
I'll do it. I'll do it. I am not a Knicks fan. They are my second least favorite team in the history of the league, but I will give credit where credit's due. I am also not a Tom Thibodeau fan, having seen him in first person with the Timberwolves, but I will give credit where credit is due. They have worked their tails off all season, and they deserve to be exactly where they are, which is in the number 4 seed. So hats off to them.
Madison Square Garden gets to host some playoff ball, and we get to hear that Oregon. That's what I'm excited about for the playoffs. But that'll be a matchup we talk about in just a moment. Let's, I think, start at the very beginning, which are the play-in games.
Absolutely.
And all 4 of the games could be interesting, but let's lead with the one that's going to trounce them all in discussion and coverage and viewership likely, which is the Lakers and the Warriors. The one spot that I know LeBron and the Lakers did not want to be in.
Yeah, not against this team.
Not against this team, and they are in it right now. Joel, it's not necessarily a prediction special, but it kind of is sort of.
Yeah.
Like, what do you expect in this one game scenario between those two teams at Staples?
Well, the Lakers are whole now. Everybody's there, expected to suit up. The question is chemistry. The Warriors are not whole. They're missing a lot of key pieces, whether it be Kelly Oubre, who will not play during the playoffs. Eric Pascal is not right. Jordan Poole is a little dinged up. And the Warriors struggle off and on with depth a little bit too. So the Lakers I think the Lakers are still the favorites in this, but you get the sneaking suspicion, like you just said, that this is the one team in the playoff tournament that the Lakers did not want to see because of the Steph Curry factor, because of the Draymond Green factor, that he will be able to make a game, I should say, out of defending at least one of those guys, whether it be Drummond or Anthony Davis or even LeBron. There's all that factor there. And who do the Lakers have that's going to shut down Steph? The answer is no one, because no one's been able to shut him down all season. And let's not forget the Warriors are without James Wiseman. That's another big body that would have been very, very helpful, even though he's a rookie, very helpful in a season like this. So it is not a given that the Lakers are going to lose this game. I'm going to say that they will lose this game.
Okay.
I think we see a Steph Curry career-defining type of game, because that's exactly what the Warriors are going to need in order to get past this. And this is we believe Warriors stuff right now. This is the Lakers are vulnerable the same way those Mavericks were vulnerable, and you only got one game that you got to dance with. Now, the difference here is that the Lakers are at home, so there is some benefit there. We're not going into the old Oracle Arena or anything like that. But I do think these are the two teams, regardless of the outcome, these are the two teams that you will see in the 7th and 8th seed. Even if the Warriors have the game of their lives and Steph plays phenomenally and they bounce the Lakers, and it's going to be a fun story, it's going to be a fun footnote in Curry's career, I don't see the Lakers losing a second game in the play-in tournament. They would just have to beat Memphis or San Antonio, which I think they absolutely will do, and then they'd be able to cruise in to that 8th seed, and vice versa. If the Warriors get dumped in a first game against Los Angeles, credit to the Lakers in a scenario like that, but I don't see the Grizzlies or the Spurs being teams that defeat LA or Golden State.
There has been some discussion that the Lakers, once they got whole, I guess we mentioned this a bunch of times in the pod, like, when will this Lakers team, A, be healthy, and B, like, limping into the playoffs is not the best position to be in.
Right.
But if you are going to be a team in the West this year to limp into the playoffs,
this is the year to do it.
You'd like to be the defending champion Lakers right now, especially when you're talking about a healthier LeBron and a healthier and looking pretty good now Anthony Davis again, and Dennis Schroeder's back for them. So those are important pieces. I just think there's been some discussion that the Lakers have sort of played coy this entire sort of season, besides the injuries, I should say, that they know how to just, quote, flip the switch, right? And like, this is the team that can, quote, flip the switch. Do you think this Lakers team, with all their experience and their top end talent, are they a flip the switch type team? Can they just turn it on right now in the last couple of games of the season and right now and sort of make their run?
I don't necessarily think if they do make that run, it's a switch flipping thing. I think it's just the sheer magnitude of talent that they do possess, and the fact that they are one of the biggest teams in the playoffs. When you look who they deploy, that's a monster front line, regardless of what position you think LeBron plays. When you got him, Anthony Davis, and Drummond essentially on your front line, that is a monster group that is also switchable enough. They play big at all of their other positions, either guys that are big for that spot, whether it be, Markieff Morris or Kyle Kuzma, are pretty big for small forwards, or they're very rangy. It's long-armed guys. Dennis Schroeder is one of the longest-arm point guards in the league. They've specifically built that roster to be able to cover a lot of space. What we have seen is when they play great defense, then they can get out and run. And that's where it's an unstoppable freight train. It's LeBron in the open court. He's got a lot of willing partners. Schroeder is jet quick when he needs to be. That's when they really can come at you. But if you're able to limit the number of turnovers, and the fact that the Lakers have looked slow on rotations for a while, for like 6 to 8 weeks, they've looked slow on rotations and they have not been able to stop at the point of attack. The exact thing that Steph Curry, is great at. If you can limit the number of turnovers that the Lakers are forcing, the Lakers have been middle of the pack on offense almost all season. They're not great. The three-point shooting comes and goes. LeBron will manufacture offense as good as anybody else, and so does Anthony Davis. But if the rest of that supporting cast is not working, they're beatable. So I've never been a big fan of the teams, especially that prematurely fall into the whole, we can flip the switch type of thing. When you've won one championship, I'm sorry, you don't have the luxury of being a switch flipping team. And the Kevin Garnett Boston Celtics were notorious for that. The Detroit Pistons with Billups and Shea and Ben Wallace got into that attitude very quickly too. And guess what? Those teams only won one championship because you try flipping the switch enough times and the switch breaks. So I don't know that the Lakers necessarily want to go that route. They don't really have a choice at this point because injuries have played that hand for them. But if they do win, it's going to be the fact that, they're big, they're talented, and it's a veteran group that does know how to play.
All right, let's move over to the East for the next discussion. By the way, at the end, we'll have a lightning round at the end to sort of pick these series and who we think is going to advance, and we'll pick our champion. Boston is hosting Washington. And yes, after all this time, Washington could end up being your 7th seed if they beat Boston. And it's definitely not impossible at this point. Boston has been a victim of injuries, COVID-19 issues, and a lot of bad, selfish play at times from and very inconsistent.
Inconsistent, absolutely.
So Washington, we know their deal. Score lots of points, give up lots of points. What happens this time?
I saw a great quote on ESPN. I don't know the writer who I should attribute it to because it was in their preview. But they said, as far as I know, Marcus Smart can only guard one person at a time. And without Jaylen Brown now on that roster because of his injury, you can deploy Marcus Smart against Brad Beal or against Russell Westbrook, not both of them. And the dispirited play that we've seen from the Celtics that comes and goes, and then other times they look totally competent. But as we've watched this Boston team all year, when they were not fully healthy, we've said this over and over, their roster is flawed to the point of critically flawed when they don't have their key pieces. And without Jaylen Brown, we're back to a critical flaw type of thing of not enough offense out of the second unit because they have to elevate Evan Fournier into the starting group. And now not enough star stopping power. And so I am not only picking the Washington Wizards to win that game, but I think Charlotte, and this is jumping into our lightning round here a little prematurely, but I think Charlotte not only beats Indiana, but then beats Boston as well. And you're looking at Washington in the 7th seed, Charlotte in the 8th seed, and the heads start to roll in Boston almost immediately after this, because I don't see a team that has been capable of overcoming challenges like this. And the loss of Jaylen Brown, it's a legit challenge.
It's a big challenge, right? Like, this team isn't built to sustain really any deficits to its roster, much less one of your top 2 guys being off this roster. This team, we talk about limping into the playoffs, what the Lakers were doing. This team in Boston is free falling. Like, they had their scrubs in and looked a little embarrassing against the Knicks to end the season. And you don't necessarily judge it.
Granted, their scrubs did beat Minnesota, who's been an above 500 team over the last 20 games.
Yeah, but the Knicks are your 2021 NBA champions, or soon to be crowned. It's a little different. You can't just throw those bad boys in there,
right?
So there's just no momentum positive for this team.
Yeah.
There's no roster movement that's been positive for this team. They're like, if they want to go into this saying in the locker room, it's us against the world, you're kind of right. Like this, like if you want to sort of put your backs against the wall, this is the time to do it. And Boston, we've seen before, be shorthanded and make a run and make a couple of runs, but this doesn't feel like that team.
No, they haven't had that wherewithal, the guts, whatever cliche you want to use. And the fact of the matter is, again, okay, you deploy Marcus Smart presumably on Brad Beal, and Kemba Walker is going to get roasted alive by Russell Westbrook with the way that Westbrook has been playing. Evan Fournier is not going to stop Westbrook. If you decide to put Smart on Westbrook instead, which might honestly be the smarter idea here, Brad Beal, who is a little bit dinged up, and that could be the X factor in this. If Beal doesn't have a great game, then what are you doing? You're probably going to put Jason Tatum on Bradley Beal and say, Tatum, now you not only need to be our best scorer, but you have to be one of our lead defenders now, and we're going to use your length against Beal and hope that the two St. Louis friends, can kind of cancel each other out. But that's risky business. And now you're asking Fournier and or Walker to play down and guard one of, Washington's other wings who are less of a threat, probably Chandler Hutchinson or somebody like that. So if I'm the Celtics, that's the way I'm drawing up those early matchups. And then you have to pray hard that Smart and or Tatum don't get into foul trouble early, or you are a cooked goose at that point.
Yeah, this Boston team just seems like doomed. I don't know if it's this game, but I think, this feels like the right kind of game actually to just knock them out of the playoffs and in their misery, don't you think?
It does. And the fact that a lot of people will pick against them, Murphy's losses, they'll probably wind up winning this thing by like 18. But even if they are able to get out of the play-in tournament alive, then you're facing Philly or Brooklyn, and it's lights out after that point too. You're prolonging the misery only a little bit longer. Whereas I think Washington, if they keep this momentum rolling and they can beat Boston in one game, then they're coming in against Brooklyn. Can they steal a game or two off of the Nets? It's possible. And honestly, I just want to see Westbrook in a series against old teammates Kevin Durant, James Harden, and let's not forget Jeff Green, who also played for those Thunder. You'd have Westbrook versus all of those guys, and you talk about like a chomping at the bit type of moment for Russ. I just think that'd be phenomenally fun, and that's why I'm trying to speak this into existence. I want Washington to beat Boston so bad and set up that first round matchup. The Nets are going to score like 180 points a game, but it's still going to be fun.
I was going to say, all right, that's fair enough. I'll stay with the East while we're talking about the other playing game is Indiana versus Charlotte. Definitely in Indianapolis. Indiana's been a very we haven't done a lot of discussion on them this season. They've had a slow fall from grace this year. They were able to maintain to stay in sort of the playoff tournament. Charlotte's another team that's had a nice quiet fall from grace. At one point, we were talking about them being a team that might be able to host a first round series, and now here they are, just barely into the play-in tournament itself. So it's two very I don't want to say underachieving because I don't think we expected a lot of both of these teams, and Charlotte definitely.
I think they overachieved. Yeah, I think Charlotte overachieved. Honestly.
Yeah. So it would be unfair to say that they're both underachieving, but I don't think people should look at these two teams the same. Like I feel like Charlotte is in a better position to win this game and try to go on and get the 8th seed.
I agree. The Pacers have been uninspiring all year, regardless of who's been out there.
And lately they've played some miserable defense. Like,
but they're so dinged up. Like, to be fair, Malcolm Brogdon, one of their two best players, has been out for a couple of months now. Miles Turner missed time early, came back, now has missed time late. That's their third best player. Sabonis will play. TJ Warren and Jeremy Lamb, both guys who were supposed to be key contributors this year, have not really played at all this season. I don't even know if Warren suited up. He may have been really early. Lamb came back for a little bit and then was out again. And Aaron Holiday, one of their young guards, is now missing time here as well. So it's just, they're down to like their B team, essentially, plus Sabonis. And then when you're playing uninspired basketball on top of that, it's not great. Now, the good news for them, they did swing that Victor Oladipo for Karis LeVert trade, and LeVert has been lighting it up just really playing impressive basketball here and getting the chance to showcase what he does. And so there is some light at the end of the tunnel for Indiana next season. If you go, all right, Brogdon, LeVert in the backcourt, you still got to figure out, who's manning that small forward spot if it's not Warren. But Sabonis and Turner are probably both back. Like, it's a decent team when healthy, but they're not healthy. And the flip side of this is Charlotte has overachieved. Their youth has kind of shown through of late when the games got tighter. We kind of figured that would happen. It doesn't help that, like, their savvy veteran guy, the one who was supposed to be there to kind of navigate them through some of these moments, Gordon Hayward, has been hurt. He may or may not come back during the playoffs. But there has just been something about Charlotte, and it's not just the LaMelo Ball effect of making things fun, but the fact that, like, Devontae Graham and Terry Rozier just play for the throat at all times on offense. It makes it fun. Miles Bridges has been a rim rocker all season and a decent defender too. PJ Washington's been a nice undersized stretch five. They're all super mobile. They play with a lot of joy. They play with good pace. They make young guy mistakes, but there's just a bounce to that Charlotte team that Indiana does not possess. And that's why I think too, Charlotte wins a game, gets some confidence, and again, speaking it into existence, goes up against a Boston team that has been uninspiring. I don't have any problem predicting Charlotte winning 2 games here to get into the first round.
I don't think so either. So, like, I'll just say this about Indiana. I think they have a couple of really good fantasy basketball players, right? Sabonis and Karis LeVert have been able to play. Like, they're good fantasy basketball players. But the team itself, if I'm going to go with that and what I feel like I'm more comfortable with winning this game, I'm just going to go ahead and start, and then I'll ask you. I'm going with Charlotte to win. All right, what about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, again, they can win a second game if it's against Boston. If it's against Washington, I probably take Washington.
All right, well, let's ask, because we'll get to the West back in that other playing game in just a moment. Sure. Boston versus Washington. Who are you taking?
I'm taking the Wizards.
So then you got Charlotte versus Boston.
I'll take Charlotte.
You'll take Charlotte to win. So Boston, talk
Heads are going to roll.
Talk about that disappointing season. So your 7th seed will be Washington, and your 8th seed will be Charlotte. We'll get back to that in a minute, because I'm thinking I'm going to take Charlotte versus Boston because Charlotte wins, and then Washington also loses. I'll say Boston ends up winning that game against Charlotte. So I think Washington is your 7th seed, and Boston is, for me, it will be your 8th seed. Mainly because I also don't mind seeing the Celtics get run by Philadelphia.
And Sixers Celtics is one of those, classic all-time rivalry matchups that the Sixers will do everything in their power to run them, because that's the history.
That's the listen. Washington Philly is not going to Charlotte Philly is not going to be like a matchup that I'm going to root for, like to watch. I'm just going to wait for that one to be over with. Maybe a few LaMelo Ball highlights in between.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to the West, get that other play in sort of figured out, and then we'll go down the actual tournament the rest of the way. The most boring for me, as far as star appeal, like so when the matchups got figured out, right, and it was Lakers, Warriors, Memphis, San Antonio. Someone tweeted, and I retweeted it with what I call a funny. It was real quick. Okay, so it was Sham Sharania who said the play-in tournament said 7 versus 8, 9 versus 10. And I retweeted and said, a pure dichotomy of glamour games cannot be found. Like, they're just, it's grindhouse, the Memphis Grizzlies versus the no one's ever been interested San Antonio Spurs, no matter what they've done or how many titles they had to win to get there. Joel, let's head to the results. Joel Cordes, Ja Morant versus the Spurs. What you got?
I'll take the Grizzlies for their ability to be disruptive. The Spurs win a lot of games that you don't think they will, but they lose just as many of those. I mean, you're talking about a team that is under 500, so that's been an MO all season. There's a lot of good young players on the Spurs. They've got a lot of good years ahead of them. They feel, a couple of pieces short for sure. But the Grizzlies, the fact that Jaren Jackson is back, he's in the starting lineup. Jonas Valanciunas has been a solid beast all season, but the fact he's in Memphis means nobody's paid attention. But he's had a really good year anchoring the middle for them. You got the Morant factor. You've got a slew of young, strong wings that they just throw at people and they get disruptive. So yeah, I'll take Memphis beating San Antonio.
Yeah, and San Antonio, let's not lose sight of the fact that Memphis was a full 5 games up on San Antonio in the standings. Like,
correct.
San Antonio is the ultimate, like, thank God there's a play and we get one more shot at this.
Right. Memphis at least had a winning record. San Antonio did not.
Yes. And there were 2 of those teams in the East, by the way. And as we sort of kind of expected, it'd probably be more out of the East than the West. Okay, so what that means, I'm going to go with you. I think Memphis, it's too deep and too young and too good to lose this. So that means Memphis is going to go on to play your loser of the Lakers and Warriors, who will be whom, Joel?
I will pick the Warriors. I'm not
the Warriors to win, or will be the loser?
The Warriors to win. I'm picking Steph to have that lifetime, career asterisk type of game. That's going to be a lot of fun. That is literally the only thing that can happen for the Warriors to win, but I think it does. I'll speak that into existence. And then it's Lakers Memphis after that.
All right. Well, I'm going to go Golden State loses to the Lakers. I do think there is an aspect of the Lakers that can, quote unquote, turn it on. But I'm more with the idea that you said that they're just deeper, right? They're a deeper, more defensive heavy team that can, I think, is more likely than not to not let a Steph Curry destroy the entire game for you.
Right.
I think the Lakers are the most apt out of the 4 teams that are in this play-in tournament for the West to be able to handle Golden State for one game. So I think the Lakers, and I think at some point, like, they're just going to ask LeBron to, assault Steph Curry if it turns into it. Like, they're just going to say, dude, just go wrap him up or something. Like, take his leg out. Not in a bad way, just in a very, well, how did they take your ankle out? Let's look at that. So I think the Lakers end up winning. Golden State takes on Memphis. You have the Memphis taking on the Lakers. So what do you think for your pull out there? You got the Lakers coming back in and getting your 8th seed, or what?
Yeah, I do. The Lakers get the 8th seed. They've got revenge on their minds in a big way at that point, and they're able to pull that off. Memphis could play some decent basketball against LA. They are one of the few teams out there, along with the Warriors, that I think could be a lot of a problem for the Lakers, just because Memphis, their whole game is to get you out of rhythm. And if they don't turn the ball over a bunch and the Lakers can't get out and run, and when Memphis plays good defense and the Lakers have kind of a middling offense at times, like that's a tough sloggy type of game. But here again, I'll take the veteran outfit of the Lakers to be able to overcome that in a close one where they got to sweat a little bit more than they hoped.
That is almost word for word what I would say if I had the Warriors beating the Lakers in that first game. That I think the the Grizzlies might knock out the Lakers if that ended up happening, which I do not think will happen. But I also think Golden State comes back and beats the Ja Morants of the world. So the 7-8 ends up being the 7-8 that we all were expecting anyway, the Lakers and Warriors. We just have them sort of in different orders at this point. All right, let's get to the bulk of the tournament itself. We are only, 28 minutes into this thing?
Yeah, we got like 12, 15 minutes left to go. We're good.
Okay, so let's start with the top of the West. Utah at 52-20 will now take on, for you, the Lakers. For me, will take on the Warriors. We've mentioned how much that if the Lakers wanted an ideal matchup for that number 1 seed, that we're trying to figure out, was it Utah or Phoenix they would rather play? Joel, this is not a terrible matchup for the Lakers.
No, it isn't. Against conventional teams, and Utah is a conventional team. They shoot a ton of threes. They defend the 3 very well. But they're big. They don't necessarily run you. They run through their sets and they get decent shots. But that's the sort of thing that I think the Lakers are equipped to be able to handle. A Drummond Rudy Gobert matchup is absolutely one worth watching. But here's the thing. I would pick Utah and feel very good about it based on all the numbers. Utah has been a statistical darling all season, and those numbers bode very, 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 very well for them as far as their chances of being an NBA champion. But they don't have Donovan Mitchell.
Nope.
And when he does come back, now you've got the rust factor and you've got all that in the middle against the defending champs. That is bad news, because when Mitchell is gone, it means Bojan Bogdanovic has to go from being like a perfect complementary scorer to being the man. He has been able to do that during the regular season. I do not foresee him being able to do that when LeBron James is the one that's going to be guarding him, which is going to be what happens. So Mitchell has to come back. He's got to have a phenomenal series, but I picked the Lakers into that 8th seed, and I said they lose to the Warriors and then get woken up. I am predicting the 8-1 upset of the Lakers over the Jazz for the reasons I just said, and also historically, the Lakers have had Utah's number in the playoffs. It goes across many, many different eras, but the Lakers have always had a way to beat a lot of those really good Jazz teams. And unfortunately, this is one of those cases. Donovan Mitchell, please come back. Please prove me wrong. But I'm not seeing it.
You know, I think there is a legitimate argument to be made that this Lakers team is the most dangerous 8 seed the NBA's ever seen.
They could be. Yeah.
That especially if you look at who they would have to go through to get to the NBA finals. I mean, you're talking about a Denver team possibly, or a Utah team possibly that is hampered, a Phoenix team that is brand new to all this, that's outside of Chris Paul. Everybody else is just babies to this whole thing. Like, there is not a lot of scary roadblocks in the way for the Lakers to try to get back to the finals if they are all back playing into some type of rhythm, which means they need to get out of this play-in.
Yeah. Oh, and I will say this. If the Lakers, like you predicted, win right away against Golden State, which is eminently possible, and they become the 7th seed, I actually think that is a far worse matchup for the Lakers to go against Phoenix. Phoenix has the ability, yes, they're kind of a system and rhythm team, and yes, they're younger, but they've got a healthy Devin Booker. Utah does not have a healthy Donovan Mitchell. So you've got your flamethrower guy, and you've got a lot of complementary pieces. Then you've got Chris Paul, whereas Utah's got Mike Conley, who has also been hurt. I like Phoenix's ability to play with different sets of pacing and their ability to also, shoot the ball. And I just think they're going to stretch the Lakers in a different way if that's the matchup than what Utah does. Again, unless Mitchell comes back and really changes the calculus there. If Mitchell comes back and plays well, Utah absolutely could out-execute the Lakers to death. They absolutely could do it. I want to give them that much credit. I just don't think he's back in time. So if it's a 2-7 matchup with the Lakers there, I actually would take Phoenix beating the Lakers in the first round. That's how much I believe in the difference and the weight of Donovan Mitchell being there or not.
Well, and that's why we'll go to who I have there, and I won't go nearly as long as this, since we've discussed a lot of Utah already, and Golden State too. But my matchup would have 1 Utah, 2 Golden State, and that's where I think Utah could get into a bit of probably a 5-game series, maybe, where I think that they would ultimately win out. I would feel a lot better if someone who's already been named was healthy and ready to play for that team, because then I would just predict it to be a sweep.
Yes.
But you always sort of have to account for one possible Steph Curry type game, which is why I think it would be 5. But in that case, I still think Utah is the much deeper, much better coached right now, because they have so many players that are experienced to get past round 1 at the very least. Yeah. So I think Utah gets out of the first round pretty easily against Golden State in my side of the bracket. Joel, then number 2 would be, 2 teams that we don't have to argue about if they're in or not. It's the Clippers and the Dallas Mavericks. Luka Doncic did not like the play-in tournament, and he does not have to play in the play-in tournament, Joel Cordes. And a very, very different Los Angeles Clippers team as far as the noise coming in around them. Give me who you like in this one, the Los Angeles Clippers or the Dallas Mavericks.
Remember that both of these teams met in the playoffs last year. They gave us a very entertaining series where the Mavericks made the Clippers sweat quite a bit. And the Clippers eventually prevailed because of that greater amount of talent and then lost to the Nuggets. I am predicting a repeat of that the Clippers will win against Dallas. I think Dallas has been flawed because Porzingis, once again, like he was in last year's series, is not entirely healthy and has not been back long enough to shake off all of the rust. The Clippers can manufacture offense. Certainly, Luka Doncic is that good, and the Dallas Mavericks are talented. They're maybe a little deeper than last year. So it's a fun series, but I'll take the Clippers probably in 6 or 7 games again over Dallas.
I think this is going to be a longer series. I think I think this will be a 7-game series. And in that case, I like the team more experienced at winning these types of series. Granted, the coach is different. The players are not different. I'm a big fan of Kawhi and getting his foot to be quote unquote not as sore as it needs to be for the playoffs.
Yep.
I do worry about regular season Paul versus playoff Paul, but I just have to roll with that at this point.
And we've seen good Paul George playoffs previously. It's just been a while, right? He could remind us. He could remind us.
I mean, sure. Like that technically is on the table of possibilities. But Paul George has played really, really well down the stretch too. These last several weeks, he has been really, really good too. So I expect that to more roll going into this game or this series. And I'm with you. I think the Clippers come in and they are your 4 seed winning the 5, and they'll move on. Boy, for you, we're going to talk about that coming up. Denver versus Portland. How about that? My preseason pick to win it all somehow has managed the number 3 seed. They are taking on the Portland. Yes. We scored. What was it? They scored
a few.
No, they scored 50. They scored 50 in the first quarter last week in a game.
Yeah, a few points.
Which was like, wow, that's a bunch. You would think they'd win by 100 on that, but they didn't. On pace to score 200, they did not. But the Portland Trail Blazers, who we are very familiar with Dame Lillard, and what time is it, Joel? Is it going to be Dame time? Is it going to be Dame time?
Yeah, it always is. and I got to say, I like Portland's roster a lot better this year than in years past. You've got Covington and Norman Powell up front at the forward spots. Nurkic is healthy this time. Anthony Simons is given good minutes behind Dame Lillard. CJ McCollum is healthy. You got Derek Jones Jr. and Carmelo Anthony coming up as your backup forward spots. It's really good. I'm looking at this as another 7-game series. Denver is vulnerable in this matchup because they don't have Jamal Murray. Denver's been phenomenal at finding other guys to step up, whether it's been Michael Porter Jr., whether it's been Facundo Campazzo. They'll probably have Morris back as well at that point guard spot, Monte Morris. Will Barton may come back during this series. It's going to be tough. This I think is the hardest series for me to pick who the winner would be. I'm going to go with the Denver Nuggets just because of Jokic's ability to be that MVP guy who is literally holding this whole thing together right now. And I do think if the Blazers lose in the first round here, not only will it be 7 games, but it may be the end of the Terry Stotts era as their coach. He's had a phenomenal run, but they're going to look at this as they got to shake the dice somehow. They got to shake things up and try something different. But I love this Portland roster too. And I do think outside of their inability to stop people, which has been a problem all year, Portland's certainly capable of winning this series and getting the upset over the Nuggets. I can't bet against Jokic right now.
No, that's fair. I'll make this short and sweet. If I pick them to win the entire Western Conference, you don't think I'm at least get them through the first round?
I see your logic.
Great. Now, granted, Portland is a really significant matchup.
Yeah,
that is going to be tough. But you know what? Screw it. Go on with Denver. Go on with Denver at least through this one. This is going to be a no thinker. Just, man, the more I think about it, I shouldn't think about it. The more I should.
And I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this since we're going quick. Regardless of who Phoenix plays, because I didn't pick anybody there. Regardless of whether Phoenix.
Oh no, we're not going quick. We're getting to it.
We're coming to them. Okay.
Oh right. Yeah. We're going through. I'm just saying I'll go quick because of my preseason pick. That's all.
Yes.
We can get into these games. I'm just saying, or these series. I'm just like, I got to at least get them through the first round. Like they got to at least get the conference semis.
That is fair.
Or else I'll be in a total embarrassment in the podcast world. So Phoenix Golden State is what you have for your 2 versus 7 matchup.
Yeah.
Phoenix is the team that people thought was a few years away a few years ago. Thought they still may be that far away, and Chris Paul has sort of helped them get over the hump. And the team that was white hot in the bubble, winning all of their games, and still missed the playoffs last year. Then comes into this season, was this close to having the regular season best record.
Yeah.
Do they have enough for a whole series versus the Warriors?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll say this, if they play the Lakers or the Warriors, I'm picking the Suns in that first round series, despite all the youth. But like I mentioned, it's not a good matchup for the Lakers. If that's how this winds up, I think based on my prediction, it'll be the Warriors. And the Warriors absolutely have the ability to win a 1-game play-in series against just about anybody. They've been that good. Steph is that good. And they've just been that like up and down roller coaster at times. But to be able to win 4 times against somebody, I'm not really picking the Warriors in any series against anybody, whether it would be Utah or Phoenix in that type of scenario, even if Utah isn't whole. In fact, if I'm the Utah Jazz, I'm praying hard that the Lakers just go ahead and win that game against Golden State so that it's the Suns Lakers and that Utah doesn't have to worry about LA to begin with. That buys some more time for Mitchell to get healthy. But that's not the scenario that I chose out, obviously. But yeah, I'm a believer in Phoenix for at least the first round.
Yeah, like the team I worry about, right? For Golden State, it has to be that 1-game scenario. That's why it's so dangerous for the Lakers, right? Mm-hmm. It's 1 game, and Steph Curry can do 1 game really, really well. Can he do 4 really well?
He might, but I don't think the rest of the roster can enough. You know,
that's the point. Can you get 4 38+ point efforts from Steph? Sure. But you're probably going to have a Draymond 3-point game in there somewhere. Mm-hmm. You're not going to have the supporting cast that has been proven to do this. Right. Probably for all 4 of those.
Jordan Poole's going to have a 3 for 14 night, where he hit 7 shots the night before and was a big help.
Yes. So I think you're right there. I have them going up against the Lakers, and you've made my point for me. This is my upset. Lakers beat Phoenix in that first round. This is really not a good matchup for Phoenix. Of the possibilities, they would have much liked the Warriors 1,000 times better. Okay. You got the Lakers going to the second round in an upset when a 1 versus 8. I got them 2 versus 7. The Lakers don't get bounced in this play-in. They're dangerous, man. They are dangerous.
Absolutely.
Now, we got our conference semi set up for the West. Let's go over to the East for a minute, if you don't mind. Let's change it up a little bit. Joel, your number 1 seed remains the Philadelphia 76ers, thanks to back-to-back games against Orlando. Tough. You have them going up against Charlotte for that 1 versus 8 matchup.
Yep.
Give it to me straight, Doc.
Well, as Chief Wiggum used to say, book 'em, Lou, because that's it. It's that's probably a sweep. If it's Philly Washington by some weird happening, then maybe Washington can get a game. But if it's Charlotte versus Philly, you're going to see the Hornets' youth shine through, and Philadelphia they're loaded for bear. They're healthy. Everybody's there now. That they're not going to mess around.
Yeah, I got them going against Boston. I feel the same way. I think Boston is cute for at least me still having them in the tournament. But I think Boston, we've run them into the ground already.
It's probably a sweep almost regardless of who Philly plays. But Washington, because of the Westbrook and Beal factor, feels like the one team out of that group that might steal a game.
Yeah, and that's why we got them playing as a 7 seed, not the 8. Yeah. So, let's go to my New York Knicks taking on the Atlanta Basketball Hawks. Probably not the matchup I would have wanted to see for 5, 6, 7 games, personally. Although I wouldn't want to see the Heat either.
No, you did not. You do not want to see them.
Of the two, I guess I'm gonna take my my bumps here. What do you like with the New York Knicks and the Hawks? Do I just go ahead and put the Knicks through? Is that what you wanted?
I probably this is a great matchup for New York. Not only were they 3-0 against Atlanta during the regular season, but Atlanta is not entirely healthy. That's been another team that, as well as they've played 10 games above 500, isn't anything to sniff at. And you've got the Trae Young factor and all that stuff. There's a lot of talent on that roster. It's been a revolving door, especially at the wing positions. You don't have Cam Reddish right now. DeAndre Hunter is back, kind of, sort of. Kevin Huerter, Bogdan Bogdanovic have both been in and out of the lineup at times. That hurts. Up front, John Collins, Danilo Gallinari, Clint Capella. That's a nice group. You'll throw a little bit of Tony Snell and Solomon Hill in there. Lou Williams will get some minutes behind Trae Young. So they're deep. I mean, they might be deeper than New York, honestly. But I don't know that depth necessarily translate. New York has an identity this year. Atlanta has the identity of, we're a pretty decent, talented team with Trae Young, and I'm not sure really what else we hang our hat on yet.
Well,
Atlanta just feels like they're a year away.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I wanted to mention that I think Tony Snell just finished a season that has never been done in basketball. It was 50% from the field, 50% from three, and 100% from the free throw line, which is good. He hasn't missed a free throw since 2019.
That's crazy. Now, granted, he's not a guy who gets a large volume of any of those shots.
No, sure,
at 5 points per game. But yeah, we'll give credit where that's due.
We'll give some credit to that. Rad. Thank you. That guy's going to come up big in their 4-game sweeping loss to the New York Knicks. Homer had off, by the way. I think this was the better of the two matchups the Knicks could have gotten, and I think. I think actually, the more I think about it, the more I'm happy that they have missed out on Miami. But I also am worried about Peyton, the starting point guard, Elfrid Payton. Yeah. He has been awful lately. And Tom Thibodeau's thing is that, like, he likes him because he's a really physical defender and he's got good size, and he's terrible. He's been terrible as of late down the stretch, and that it worries me going into the playoffs how bad he was. I think against the Celtics on Sunday, we had like 6 shots, none near, and made like 4 turnovers. Like, it was rough. And he's had a bad last week and a half of the season. That's not positive momentum. I think
not when you're going to face Trae Young, right?
No, no. Granted, I do like the ability for him to physically match up with Trae Young, but Trae Young's tough, man. That's a quick dude. It's hard to stay in front of. So I think that's going to be a good series. I think this is a 6-game series, but I'm leading with my champions, New York Knicks. I already left my pick there. Did you like New York moving on?
Yeah, I do. And 6 games sounds about right. Could even be 5 games if Atlanta's youth really shows through in a bad way here. Peyton just has to be a minutes eater and not make too many mistakes. He's got to buy you some minutes early on against Trae to minimize the amount of time that Derrick Rose or Emmanuel Quickley winds up on him, because those guys are really going to struggle trying to check Young. And in fact, what you might see is a lot of minutes from somebody like Alec Burks, where he comes in and is a little bit of a bigger guy, a little longer arm, maybe even Frank Ntilikina, maybe. You're going to need some bodies to throw at Trae. And if Peyton is hurting you on the offensive end, that's the way it's going to go. But this is where the Knicks' identity, I think, of being relatively low scoring, really physical, slug it out. I don't think that's a great matchup for this Atlanta team right now as presently constructed. If they were fully healthy and had that fleet of wings that they could just keep throwing out there, I would feel a lot differently about this.
All right, Milwaukee hosts Miami, probably a team Milwaukee didn't want to see here in the playoffs. But Miami is kind of coming to its own, and Miami is kind of built for the playoff run. And guess what? It's happening right now. The Miami Heat at the Milwaukee Bucks. Miami got a chance for another run in here.
They have a chance. I think this is a 7-game series as well, just like the 3-6 matchup out in the West with Denver and Portland. I'm going to take Milwaukee in this because one team has Giannis and the other team doesn't. But this is a really tough one to predict as well. Miami has all of the ingredients to make another run. And I will say this, if the Miami Heat can actually beat the Milwaukee Bucks, they can beat the Brooklyn Nets in the next round too. I just don't think it's going to happen, but 7 games is going to decide this one as well.
Yeah, so if Milwaukee doesn't win this in 5, it will take 7. If that sort of makes sense. Like if they're not able to come out of the gate swinging, and they've struggled defense, they struggle against good teams, and like you sort of should, but they struggle a lot against good teams, especially for a team that's a 3 seed. And that's sort of what sort of weighs on my mind when sort of taking this pick. I lean Milwaukee too, but Miami is a tough team. Like they're just mentally tough and physically tough, and like they have a knack. Like, does that make sense? Like they have sort of a knack.
They remind me of what the Spurs were, at the top of the Spurs. Yeah,
they have a knack of winning when they need to win and winning when it's important to win, and that's hard to quantify.
Yeah.
So, like, as much as I like Milwaukee because they're more talented and they're deeper, and they do have a guy who's a MVP.
Perfectly said. Yep.
It's a tough thing to try to put into an equation. Like, who do you like? I slightly lean Milwaukee, but I don't love the pick. I really don't love it. I think Miami could very easily come out. And well, since I got him knocking out, I think they could probably be Brooklyn too, to be honest with you. Like, if I had them get past, like, that might have been an upset out there. Last one, you have Brooklyn taking on Washington for that 2-7. And
5 games. 5 games.
I have them taking on Washington too. Brooklyn's just too much for them.
Yeah, too much firepower. They are healthy-ish. They're going to need that series. Again, as a tune-up, Brooklyn's got to get their defensive chemistry together. The offense will come. They're so talented there. But defensively, they're going to need that in the subsequent rounds. So in some ways, 5 games feels about right. Washington gets 1. It wouldn't actually be a bad thing, though, if it goes to 6 games. I honestly think like Brooklyn needs as much time on the court in a tune-up scenario as they can possibly get. But yeah, and I want that Westbrook reunion against his old mates from OKC. That'll be a fun storyline. But nobody's beaten the Nets in the first round unless it had been Miami. And that was kind of what I was hoping to see too, as a Miami-Brooklyn first-round matchup, but it didn't come to pass. That would have been dangerous for the Nets.
I won't even take up that amount of time. I think Brooklyn sweeps them. Okay. I think you're right. I stopped wanting to trust Brooklyn because of the lack of time that those guys have all had together, healthy, and it's sort of it's hard to trust health. Like, especially when they haven't had it. So it's sort of hard to be that way or be to that. And, I'm not going to get deep into this, but, Kyrie Irving saying that he's not really a basketball player. He's worried about the stuff in the Middle East and elsewhere. I could see a game mentally being a little off for one, maybe in the first round that might cost him a game. But that's really hard to see against Washington for a team that it doesn't take much to put up 130 on them. Like, it really doesn't.
No, and let's be fair, for as much junk as Brooklyn has dealt with all season, whether it be self-inflicted or not, they still were 1 game away from the number 1 seed. They still won 24 more games than they lost. So that's how good they've been, even with all the stuff we just said, right?
Yeah, they just had that in the tiebreaker loss to Philly for that number 1. That's why I loved Miami playing Philly a couple nights ago when they were only like a 1-point favorite, opened up as a 1-point underdog. I was like, Philly's got 2 games plus the tiebreaker against Orlando. I mean, it's gonna be, they don't care about this game as much. Plus, Embiid wasn't even in Miami. Like, who cares? Yep. Anywho, back to the West we go for my good friend Joel C. Cordes. Joel, Lakers Clippers is your conference semifinals. Let's stay at the Staples Center, shall we? Thoughts on the 2 LA teams going at each other?
Yeah, and I'll go quick through these rounds just because once we actually get to them, and we know who it actually is, we'll dig in a little deeper. But I think this would be the end of the line for the Lakers. If it's an LA series, I will take the Clippers in that second round. If the Lakers are able to pull off that monumental upset against the Jazz and the Clippers take care of business against the Mavericks, then all things are basically equal. And I think the Clippers are the better team at this point. They got enough big bodies up front and enough star power to throw at the Lakers, and it's a punch-for-punch battle.
I got Utah taking on the Clippers, and I'll be honest with you, I got Utah winning that series.
Wow. Now, you must be assuming that Mitchell is back, right? And playing pretty well in order for that to be true, right?
I'm not assuming it. I'm hoping for it based on this prediction. Okay. I never like to assume things with health. But even with the Clippers, even without him, like, I think this is another 7-game series.
Okay.
Like, I think this one goes super long, and I think at that point it's any bounce the ball in a game of 3 or a game 6 or whatever. If I believe that's how long the series is going to be, which is what I do think. I think that's a dogfight of a series between those two. And I have Utah.
As good as they are, I don't like a matchup of Joe Ingles and Bojan Bogdanovic versus Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, and that's what the matchup turns into. For a bit, and those are really good players in a really good system, but I don't like that.
It's also hard for me to really find myself thinking that playoff Paul is going to be anything but what we've seen from playoff Paul.
That's also fair.
That's one of those, just like, for me, it's a toss up, right? And it's sort of how I sort of look at it with the Mitchell health and the playoff Paul and the Bogdanovic, like. Yeah, to me, it's a toss-up. It's okay. I'm gonna keep saying words. How about to the next one? The Denver Nuggets versus your Phoenix Suns for your other conference semifinal matchup. Joel Cordes, who's taking on the Clippers for the Western Conference title?
You'll be happy to know in this case it would be the Nuggets. Would be my pick.
Oh yeah,
the Suns and everything that they've had is good enough to win a first-round series with that right matchup. Things will tighten up. I don't think the Suns are perfectly equipped to slow down Jokic in the way that the Nuggets will have enough bodies to slow down Paul and or Booker just enough. But that'll be a tough series. I would say Nuggets in 7 over Phoenix in the semifinals.
Lakers versus the Nuggets for me in that conference semifinal, and I'm taking the Lake Show.
Okay.
Again, I think this is another bad matchup for Denver if it is the Lakers.
It is if that's true, yeah.
And in that case, I think the Lakers, I don't want to say cruise because I think 6 is probably as long as it goes, but I think the Lakers can make fairly easy work. Like, they could probably win in 6, and a couple of those wins are like by 16-20 or something. Like, I think that's something that realistically could happen in that series. So I got the Lakers taking on the Jazz, which will be the most exciting of conference finals matchups. To the East, let's get to our conference finals there. Joel, you got Philadelphia taking on the Knicks. The Knicks move through. I'll already write that down. Don't even need to speak on that one, buddy. You have spoken.
You are wrong. Yep.
Well, there are no. Okay. What other option is there?
Sixers in 5 if they play in New York.
Let me ask this:
yes.
Do the Knicks get 1 in Philly, or is it in New York?
I don't think it really matters, but let's say in New York. Let's say they get a Madison Square Garden Magic game, and everybody's happy. And I would say this: it would probably be early in the series. I would not be surprised if maybe the Knicks win like the opening game, or now that wouldn't work because they wouldn't be in Madison Square Garden. But whether it be game 1 or game 3, I think it's early in the series. It gives a lot of hope. Everybody's like, oh yeah, they've got a chance. And then Philly just turns out to be that much more talented. And that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. Like, New York is a good physical team. Philadelphia is a gooder, physicaler team. It's just the way it is.
I don't want to say it out loud. So can we just move on?
All right.
I'll put it this
Arky
way.
Shea concurs.
I do think I have more faith in the Knicks than you do. And Tom Thibodeau as well. I think there's a chance that they could get 2. Could get 2. Not saying they will.
There's a Lloyd Christmas chance, yes.
I think there is a better than Lloyd Christmas chance that they can get 2. It's going to be really hard. To play that kind of defense on those athletes for that long and to be able to squeeze out 2, it's going to be rough. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's impossible. What I think is not impossible is winning the series, and that's just why I put it out there into the universe. If the gods are listening, I'm still rooting for you. That just don't read what I wrote down. So, we both have Milwaukee and Brooklyn for your other conference semifinals. So, who is playing, taking on Philadelphia? Is it a 1-2 matchup or a 1-3 matchup?
If the Bucks are able to beat the Heat, then I think the Bucks can beat the Nets, and I will take Milwaukee. I'm not happy with the pick, just because Milwaukee may not even get that far. But I will take the Bucks if they can survive Miami. I think Miami is honestly the tougher matchup than Brooklyn in that case. I am still not convinced that Kevin Durant will be entirely healthy throughout a playoff series. We shall see, but
may I just say that, so I don't mean this as a poo-poo on the NBA, because I think it's super exciting and super fun to watch. The NBA is the more predictable of playoffs.
Yeah.
Right? It usually does more chalk than other playoff series and other
for sure
do. In that case, like, you would think Brooklyn and their talents,
and the fact the league certainly wants them to get to the conference finals against Philadelphia.
They wouldn't mind sort of seeing that if there's a little ref angle going there. But I keep going back to our through line this entire season, which is trusting them to stay healthy for the rest of the playoffs. And granted, that's not a full season. It's somewhere between, I mean, by the time they get here, we haven't probably beaten Washington. I haven't been sweeping them. So like 4 to 10 games to get to the conference finals, right? Yeah. I want to see that show in the conference finals. I want to see all that fun. I want to see
Giannis versus Durant is
so bad.
That's a matchup, right?
So bad. I want to see that. I don't know. I don't know if I can fully put my money behind it, right? Like if I'm going on the odds of what's happened this season, the odds are we're losing 1 or 2 of these guys at some point this playoffs.
Correct.
When that happens, is it enough to beat Milwaukee? Is it Durant against Giannis? I'm going to go Brooklyn too, but I really, really hate it. And I got to be honest, if you're Giannis, you got to hate it too. Because we talked about how Philly, I think, sort of has to feel like this is kind of their year. To a degree, a much lesser one because we've talked about them less. Milwaukee's got to feel like they got to break through that ceiling at some point, like really soon too, don't they?
Yeah. So you're taking Brooklyn in this round. I'm taking Milwaukee.
Yeah, I don't love it either.
Okay.
Do you think that's a long series?
Yes, but here again, I'm throwing so many caveats. If Milwaukee can beat Miami, then they're on a roll. And if they're coming in against Brooklyn, I think they can beat Brooklyn in 6.
Okay.
I think we're looking at a team that just is not ready chemistry-wise when things really, really get tight. And Milwaukee, even though they've been inconsistent at times this year, more of that core has been through these battles before together versus what Brooklyn has. So
no, and that's true. It's one of those things when we talk about Phoenix, like young teams need to lose before they can win, right? Into the playoffs, they need to. It's kind of that way with Milwaukee because they have so much experience with this, and Brooklyn is sort of a newish team,
right?
But they're full of world champions and guys who have been deep in the playoffs and just not together,
right?
So like that balance, like this. The NBA owes us a 7-game Brooklyn-Milwaukee series. They really do. Like, I don't care how you got to get there. Give it to us, NBA. Are you listening, Adam Silver? Make your calls. Damn it. Okay, Joe, Western Conference champion will be who? You have the Clippers taking on Denver. Who's going to play for a world championship?
I'm taking the Clippers.
Okay.
I think they are able to put it together. This is a year where they were able to fly under the radar for mostly the right reasons. And as we've talked about, it's a wide open field with a lot of flawed teams. And if you can get the Lakers out of the way, you have as good of a chance against anybody. Again, this is assuming that Paul George gives us a credible playoffs and not the previous couple of ones that we've seen. But that's a huge assumption on my part, and that's why I'm taking the Clippers.
By the way, the Clippers, if they're based on your scenario, is going to help get rid of the Lakers because you're going to have them getting rid of the Lakers themselves.
Correct.
So it's like, hey, Lakers out of the way. Yeah, we took care of it.
Mm-hmm.
I have Utah taking on the Lakers for the championship. Adam Silver's going to love me. I got the Lakers going on to the championship. We both have Los Angeles represented. We just have a different Staples Center team. And like I said, this is not the 8 seed that anybody wants to see.
The last time an 8 seed made it to the NBA Finals was also in a shortened year, right? It is a shortened year.
Good call. Do you know who that was?
some team.
Who?
The James Dolan Fedoras, I think they were called.
Stop that. Okay, over in the East, let's find out who's going to take on the Lakers. Joel, you got Philadelphia versus Milwaukee. Who you got going to find their spot playing for the Larry O'Brien?
Yeah, this is another Armageddon level series, just like Brooklyn and Milwaukee can and should be. I will take Philadelphia. I do think this is their year, and here's where it comes down to. Philadelphia also is mostly battle tested with that group, at least the core guys. They've added in some supporting pieces, much like Milwaukee has, and Philadelphia's got 2 superstars. Milwaukee's got 1, and it has felt like Philly's year almost all season, and I'm going to ride with my gut on that.
And if it wasn't for Joel Embiid's injury, he might be your MVP this year.
Correct.
Like if he didn't have to sit out like 3 weeks, like he may be the guy that we're, instead of Jokic, we might be. And
the fact that you can throw Ben Simmons, you can throw Tobias Harris, you can get a little Danny Green and Matisse Thybulle. You've got bodies that you can throw at Giannis, where you're not going to ask one guy to guard him, but you're going to be able to scheme against him, and then you've got Embiid roaming, trying to protect the rim, although Brook Lopez is going to pull him away from the rim quite a bit, but they're going to be able to scheme, and they've got a decent collection of defensive bodies to make Giannis really work in a way that I don't see Brooklyn having those defensive bodies. They've got offensive bodies. They don't have defenders against Giannis.
Yeah, and the thing about the playoffs is it gets a little more defensive.
Right.
It gets a little more defensive than the regular season. I got Philadelphia taking on Brooklyn, and I'm with you. I've said it the whole season. This just felt like Philadelphia's year. They probably thought that 2 years ago. They probably thought that to a degree last year. But I think the changes they have made with the head coach, the changes they have made with the general manager, and I think a couple of the adjustments they've done with the team itself, I think sort of puts them over the edge. And again, that thing I literally just talked about with Phoenix, teams got to lose before they win. Philadelphia's done their share of losing. And I think it's a time for them to break through the East and get themselves to the NBA Finals. Joe, you got the Clippers in Philadelphia playing for the World Championship. Who is your NBA champion?
Kawhi Leonard has been a destroyer of dynasties, a destroyer of worlds, but Danny Green has won 3 different championships with 3 different teams.
Look at you go.
And former teammates and multiple stops now play against each other. I will take Philadelphia. As we said, it feels like their year for all of the reasons you just said. And yeah, Danny Green, 4 championships with 4 different teams. I think it's a real possibility as we dub him Robert Horry Jr.
Put your spect on his name. Will you call him for MVP?
No, that I will not do.
All right, fair enough. I'm with you too. I think Philadelphia, it's their year. And I think it's watching a Philadelphia Lakers series, I think would be supremely fun. And I think that's another long series, which I think if the NBA can get pretty long series out of 3 of the 4 we're talking about, right? 3 of the 5, sorry.
Yeah.
With the conference semis and the Larry O'Brien. I think that plus opening up, I guess it'll be day 2 of the, not really opening up, but the day after, of having the most glamorous play-in game ever, bruh. NBA's got to be happy with that. Coming off of all this money that they were losing, coming off all these issues apart, possibly having to renegotiate contracts, all these issues with inventory and stuff to get all this, man, they licking them lips, man. Come on.
Yeah, and 2 big market teams in either of our scenarios, right? Philly versus LA in either scenario, you can feel good about that. You're not gonna feel good, and I am not a believer in NBA conspiracies, except for the couple of Tim Donaghy series. Those actually may have been rigged, although not by the NBA itself, but by him. I'm not a big believer in them rigging things, but it just feels like there's no way in any scenario that like you would ever get Utah and Milwaukee, no matter how good they are, no matter whether Donovan Mitchell comes back, something will happen and it will be physically impossible for that small of a market matchup to ever happen. And I don't believe in conspiracies, but I do believe in that. Like it'll never happen.
Joe, let me ask you one last question before we leave on this playoff edition and on the playoffs themselves. One of the 4 matchups in the play-in tournament is Magic, as far as TV is concerned. Because it ended up being Lakers versus Warriors that they're going to put on at 9 p.m. Central, 10 p.m. Eastern. Nice and late for everybody.
Yeah.
Anybody who thought that the play-in tournament might be a 1-year test, did they just lose all hope when that happened?
I think we will keep this format, even if the play-in tournament doesn't live up to expectations quite yet. But the fact that the field was larger, there was more competition down the stretch, and the fact that on Sunday was a really fun day, right? It felt like baseball. It
with
felt
a lot
like,
on the line. Yeah.
Right, a lot on the line, or the final week of football where you've got a lot of seating at play. And
they're all playing at the same time.
Exactly.
The big important ones. Yeah.
They could stack all of those games like that and manipulate the last couple days of the schedule. I think that is as valuable of prime TV as whatever the play-in tournament itself turns into. It's the ability to have this build up, and they're going to keep that. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't hurt that the defending champions are still really, really good, but they're also in the play-in game, which is kind of like...
It's certainly a storyline. Yeah,
it's a huge one. And maybe for everyone's concerned, the only storyline, while you and I will be very interested in Boston and Charlotte and kind of interested in Memphis. We'll just sort of see what the score is there. That's an NBA TV special.
If there ever was one. That's NBA TV, the Ocho.
Joel, that's kind of mean, but I know exactly what you mean. Joel, that wraps it up. We have picked our champions. That's pretty cool. So enjoy your time, Philadelphia. We have rejoiced in your championship sanctum. You owe us.
The Bevo Nordman episode is in the books. If you've been listening on audio versions of the show and you want the video version, please come on over to YouTube, search us, hashtag BbA or Basketball by Association. Please like, share, subscribe, all of those good things. Hit the little dingy buttons that they've got there. And if you're on the video version...
I'm sorry, the what buttons?
The buttons that make dings and bells and whistles and whatever,
Fair.
People dance, whatever.
Do they? What buttons are you pressing?
That's a different show. And then, if you're on the video version, you want audio, we are on Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you find your podcasts. I'm out. We've talked too much.